Hi, I'm Owen from Rask Australia. Thanks for tuning in to the Rask Network.
Before we get into today's show, there are a few things we have to go over.
Firstly, what you're about to hear and see is limited to general information only. It's not personal financial advice like you get from a financial planner. Also, it's important to remember that past performance is not indicative of future performance. That means that anything that's happened in the past, or we say today, is not necessarily going to reflect what happens in the future. Lastly, please consider that any of the guests or myself are featuring on this program may have a financial interest in some of the products or shares mentioned. That's enough from me. I hope you enjoyed today's program.
Karen, welcome onto the Australian Finance Podcast today.
Thanks, Kate. Great to be here.
Now, we're going to have a very fun and interesting conversation today on money mindset. And everyone that came to our Adelaide Rask Roadshow event got to meet you and hear from you for the first time. And it is wonderful to have you on the podcast today to dive into this further. But before we kick off this conversation, I'd love to hear from you what your role is as a money coach. How did you end up in this position and why you're the person to have this conversation with?
Great. So if I start off, my background is I was a financial advisor for 16 years, and I love being a financial advisor. But what I tend to find working with hundreds of clients over many years was that what they do with money got me really curious. Like, we were put together as a financial advisor, a really logical, rational plan, do this with money, do that. And then people would come back for a review in 6-12 months' time and kind of completely deviated from the plan. I was like, why do people do what they do with money? So I got really curious around the psychology of money and started studying in that field, and realized that it was quite impactful, and it's something that we in financial services didn't really approach. So I went and did some more deeper study around it. And I think at that time I was going through as a financial advisor, and I saw that a lot of people in Australia that need financial support and advice and guidance and education weren't really getting it because the fees to go and see a financial advisor were quite high. So I decided a few years ago to sell out of the practice and really focus on what I do as a money coach. So it is really around our behaviours, our relationship with money. So that's formed as how we think about it, how we feel about it, and the way that we behave with it. So that's what kind of led me from financial advisor to money coach.
It's really interesting because we can create the ideal plan that's got everything sorted out. But then when it comes to actually implementing it and staying on track, there's so many other barriers that get in the way that we can't sort of get from a numbers point of view. They're more about our emotions and our money story and how we relate to the world around us, which is why I'm so interested to have this conversation today. But at a high level, how do you differentiate a money coach and a financial advisor? Because a lot of people might not have come across the concept of a money coach before and what that looks like.
Yeah, Kate, money coaches are fairly new and evolving industry, particularly in Australia. It's more common over in America and perhaps in the UK. So I like to think of the way that we manage money. It's just like there's two sides to a dollar coin. There's two sides to managing our money. So one is the external side, and that's around what a typical financial advisor would do: cash flow, investing, retirement planning, insurance. So it's all external to us. There's one side of that dollar note. Then on the other side of the dollar note is our relationship with it. So it's how we think about money. What are our beliefs when it comes to money? And we'll unpack that a bit further in this episode, I'm sure. Then how we feel about it, because our emotions drive a lot of our actions and behaviours. And so then looking at, well, what are our financial habits and behaviours? Are we more spenders or are we more savers? Do we invest? Do we spend? What are those behaviours? So as a money coach, we are more focused on the internal relationship with money rather than the external practical side of managing our money.
Okay, I think that gives us a really good overview to start with. So when it comes to money and how we manage it, what are some of those maybe sciencey reasons that we can sometimes come up against some blocks or find it challenging to take that first step or get out of debt or start talking to our partner about money?
So money coaching is very heavily informed by neuroscience, which is the study of our brain. And we're all gifted this amazing organ called a brain. It's more powerful than any computer that a human has created before. but unfortunately, we're not given an instruction manual out of how to use it. So therefore, we don't use it to its full capacity, and it can also trip us up. So I'm going to take us on a little quick tour of our brain. I'm not going to use all the sciencey terms,
but basically go back to year 12 bio.
No, that's right. And the other reason I can't pronounce them properly anyway. So there's three distinct systems in our brain. Think of it kind of like a triad. So the first one to form and evolve for humans is a primitive part of our brain. So it's highly responsive, like 0.15 seconds. It's very just kind of wired for survival and pleasure. And its main purpose is to keep us safe, to keep us out of harm's way. And so the brain's idea of keeping us safe is keeping us in what we're familiar with. So that part of our brain thinks uncertainty or something that's different or unfamiliar is dangerous. So if we take, for example, what's familiar to us, maybe growing up for you was parents were living pay to pay, or maybe they were getting into debt, or maybe they were super vigilant savers. So for that brain, keeping them safe and familiar is staying in line with those patterns. So that's that first part of our brain. It's really wired to look out for dangers and to keep us safe. And the second system within our brain is what's called the limbic system. And this is where we store all of our emotions, our feelings, and our memories. And they get processed and stored. And so if we think of different emotions that we have, like enjoyment, fun, guilt, excitement, all of these emotions and experiences that we have growing up get stored, and they get stored in this computer system, but quite often they get put into a storage space where we can't access them. Like, we don't kind of understand what they are and how they were formed. So that's that feeling emotional part of our brain. And then the last part of our brain to form is that prefrontal cortex, and that's not fully formed until the ages of 22 to 25. So until then, our brain isn't fully formed to process in a logical, rational way. So, and that only accounts for about 5% of our processing with our brain. So when we think of making financial decisions, we would really want to use that slow, logical part of our brain, which actually looks at what are the long-term consequences, what are the costs and the benefits. But quite often we don't get to that part of that processing. We're more kind of like instinctive, primitive, following the herd and what everybody else is doing, or it's very emotion-based. So when we're thinking about making any decisions, but specifically financial decisions, I think it's important that we ask ourselves, okay, which part of my brain am I using to make this decision? Is it my primitive, danger-focused brain? Is it my emotional brain? Or is it actually my slower thinking, conscious, logical brain?
That's a really interesting way of looking at it, because just thinking about making a purchase, it's often the I'm hungry right now, or that looks really good. Even though I've had lunch, I really want to have that treat. But it's not often our slower thinking brain that's making all of those purchasing decisions, is it?
That's right. And so sometimes if we're really stressed or we want to feel better and experience a nice emotion, sometimes the go-to will be, well, let's just buy myself something and treat myself. So we're just really stuck in that emotional part of our brain rather than moving up to the rational part and say, well, if I purchase this thing, is it taking me closer towards my goals or further away from them? We don't kind of get to that level of the processing. We're stuck in that emotional part of our brain.
Are there any ways that we can try and make ourselves a little bit more long-term focused in the moment when we're seeing something and we just want it now?
Yeah. So I think the first part is that awareness. So now that the listeners can understand, there's 3 different parts of my brain, and just asking that question, which part am I using, rather than just going to that default, we kind of need to override those instinctive, primitive patterns that we have in regards to just really quick thinking, really emotional thinking, and stopping and actually thinking about the long-term consequences, because we kind of just operate on autopilot and do these things without asking ourselves a question.
Yeah. The other interesting thing, you mentioned operating on autopilot, and sometimes the reason we make our decisions is based off stuff that we've grown up with. Like, we've seen our parents do it, so we just sort of automatically do it that way, or that's what our friends are doing, so makes sense for us to do it too. How can we better understand our own financial story? And if someone's in their 30s right now listening and they've never really thought about their relationship with money growing up, how can they sort of start to look and unpack that and see if it's impacting them today?
I think that's a really important point, Kate, because what neuroscientists have shown us through their research and studies is that most of our money patterns and behaviours are formed between the ages of 2 and 12. And because that's when most of our brain development occurs. So 95% of our brain development happens by the age of 12. So we've got to think about our brain development, and what we learn about money is pretty much by osmosis, by our parents, by our role models, by the environment. And most of what we learn isn't even by the words. It's by being a young child, being an emotional sponge, just picking up on the environment and the emotions of the adults around us. As much as what we hear, it's about what we see as well. And so if you can actually spend some time reflecting on what was life like for me growing up from a financial point of view, because it has a significant impact on those patterns, those autopilots that we form as a consequence of that. And it's really important. One thing that you can look at is just take some quiet time and reflect on, if I can just go back and what are my 3 most significant memories when it comes to money? Just the 3 most significant ones. And our brain, the more emotional that they were, the more hardwired and deeper they're going to become. So it might be around, you might have heard over and over and over, never get yourself into debt, never borrow money, pay for cash for everything. Because if you've heard one of your parents say that over and over again, it becomes hardwired, and you create these neural pathways in your brain that just automatically will just send you to debt is dangerous. It's kind of like, when we grow up, at some stage, we're going to burn our fingers, like on a hot oven tray. Like, it's like, ouch. And because it is so painful and it hurts, it fires and wires those neural pathways. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, that hot oven tray is money, depending on what they experience growing up. So it's about reflecting on, what are my 3 most significant money memories, and perhaps having a look at, well, what did I learn from that growing up? How has that impacted the way that I manage my money today?
I think if someone's listening and they haven't done this exercise before and they're looking at their past and going, oh, nothing really jumps out at me, are there any examples that you've seen with your clients of those significant memories that maybe on the surface level they didn't seem that important, but after some digging, they actually were making a big impact on their current decisions?
Yeah. So for people that really are challenged by when they go back and think about, well, what was money like? Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to go back and think there, because we think of all of those memories as a file that's stored in our computer. Sometimes there's a passcode on it and it's really hard to get to. So the more that we can kind of almost switch that conscious part of our brain off and go into more of a meditative state where we are feeling more relaxed, and then that tends to be more conducive to unpacking some of those memories around what it was like for you. But sometimes it just does take a couple of goes at it to feel really relaxed, to kind of think about what some of those memories are. But the more that you focus on it, they will start to come out. And I think it's helpful, perhaps if you can keep a little notebook or a journal, and as things come up, just start writing them down. It can be really helpful.
Do you find that's usually a solo process, or does it help to do it with a friend, a partner, a money coach, a counsellor?
I think it's really helpful to do it on yourself. Do some inner reflection and just in your own quiet time. So when I work with clients one-on-one, I get them to write not just the 3 money memories. I give them a template where they write out their whole money story. So what is the first memory that you have? And it might be school banking, or getting pocket money, or maybe getting birthday or Christmas money, or being given a couple of dollars to go down to the shops and get some lollies. So we start off with our first memory, and then we go what's the next memory? It might be your first job. It might be moving out of home, and just go through year by year. And Kate, what I find with people that go through this process is those themes, or whatever they experience between the ages of, it's normally not 2 that they can remember, maybe 5 to 15. There'll be certain themes there. And then what I see, Kate, without exception, those themes will continue in their 20s, in their 30s, and their 40s. Patterns will just repeat over and over again. So it's really important to understand what they are. So if I can share some examples, because then listeners might kind of relate to some of these.
Yeah, I think this is probably best shared for an illustration.
So I was working with this one lady, Tara, and we uncovered through going through her money memories that what she believes about money is that it was dangerous and scary. And when she did the exercise of going back and reflecting on what she remembers about money, she recalls about the age of between 8 and 10 swallowing a 50-cent coin. Which is quite extreme.
And not where I saw the conversation going.
No. And so like her mum was freaking out. It's like not only was it dangerous and you're going to choke, it's dirty, it's got germs. So it was really traumatic experience, like, burning yourself on a hot oven tray. And so she decided that money was really dangerous. And all through her life, she just avoided it as much as she could until her mother passed away and she got a significant inheritance. And she was like, well, I have to start dealing with that. And her parents owned like a small business, and she worked in there at a young age. And someone came in and kind of like dwindled her with the change and said, like, I gave you a $50 note instead of a $20 note, and demanded the money. So she had some pretty traumatic experiences at a young age and having quite a lot of financial responsibility. So she was under the age of 12 and she was working in this shop of her family. Yeah, she just created these beliefs that money is really dangerous. And when we actually unpack that, and she's like, I just completely forgotten about it because it was stored in her subconsciousness and it wasn't something that she was aware of, but it was driving all of her beliefs and her behaviors around money. So actually going through and reflecting on your own story is really powerful because it gives you that awareness as to where was the origin of where I decided that I'm going to do something. And for her, it was about avoiding money at all costs and just not wanting to deal with it because for her, it was perceived to be dangerous.
That's really interesting. And so once you've identified some of those money memories and you might have uncovered something you hadn't thought about before, or you hadn't occurred to you that might be impacting your decisions today, what steps can you then take to go, okay, money was a very scary thing in my household growing up. My parents were always fighting about money. There was never enough. It was causing anger and pain. How can you then take this knowledge and turn that into some productive action?
So when we have these experiences growing up, we're very young. And so we're very much need that support and dependency on our adults. And quite often our adults aren't emotionally equipped to deal with that. And so quite often they don't acknowledge those things. So I don't know about you, but I grew up in a time where if you cry, it's like, Karen, stop crying, go to your room. Like it was like expressing emotions was just not able to be dealt with or not able to be acknowledged. And so for the individual now, it comes down to once you actually discover, well, what were those traumatic experiences that I had growing up? Now that I'm an adult, I have the tools and resources that we can kind of heal that and overcome that because those emotions get stored in our body. Kate, do you know what the 3 most common emotions are when it comes to money? 3 most common.
Fear?
Yes, fear is number 1.
Happiness?
Oh, I wish. It's guilt.
Guilt? Shame?
Guilt and shame. Yeah, fear, guilt, and shame. And so for the listeners out there, it's identifying, well, what are your 3 most common emotions that you feel around money? Because we have this experience and then we create these emotions. So the emotions are kind of like the chemical signature of what happened to us. And those emotions get stored in our body. And we can kind of have those emotions and it could be a mood and we can kind of go out of it and that's fine. But if we experience those emotions on a regular basis and those things that we decided about money are reinforced over and over again, it becomes a temperament. and moves from a mood to a temperament to, after years and years, it almost becomes part of our personality. So it's about looking at the memories and then looking at what kind of are those main emotions that I experience. Is it resentment, like everyone's doing better than me and everyone's got more money than I have and I can never get ahead? Or is it kind of like gratitude? It's like, wow, I'm so lucky I have what I have. It's really interesting, Kate, when I work with people. I work with people that, like you said before about they did grow up in poverty. There wasn't enough money to go around. And some people took on, and that energy was very much about not enough and lack and fear. And then others kind of can be in the same financial situation, but they kind of see it, well, I've got my house, I love my family, I've got all this gratitude. I'm looking at all the positive things rather than the negative things. And you can have those same experiences in terms of those contrasts with siblings. So they grew up in the same family environment, but have come out with very different outcomes when it comes to their own money mindset.
Yeah, I find it interesting. Even in my own family, there's siblings that have completely different approaches to money. And it's fascinating. They can grow up in the same household, but still deviate so far apart.
Yeah, that's right. And it does, when people are going through and thinking of their money memories, or they write out their whole money story from like 5 years old to 40 years old or 30 or 50, however old you are today, it's about what you're wanting to do is kind of look at where are those traumas? Where are those money traumas? Because those traumas, we develop these strategies or patterns to protect ourselves. And those strategies or patterns might be, well, I'm just going to spend everything I earn, or I'm not going to spend any money, or I'm not going to get myself into debt, or I'm going to get myself into debt. We create these strategies based on those experiences that we had. So we want to look at traumas. And there's two different types of traumas, Kate. One trauma is kind of like, I call it, with a capital T, and it's kind of things like a marriage separation, and then so the finances change, or it could be a family member going bankrupt, or maybe losing their job. So they can be, or the death of a primary breadwinner. So they can be quite significant, and you kind of look at that and you look at someone's situation and go, yeah, they've suffered a big trauma. But then you can also have a trauma with a little t. And for us, it might seem insignificant, and it might be something as simple as I was 7 years old, I was running around the house playing chasey with my brother, and I knocked over my mum's favourite vase. And she got so upset and angry at me. And I took on as a little child is, mum loves that vase more than she loves me. And then I'm not good enough, or money's more important than I am. So it's a really small trauma, but it impacts the brain in the same way.
That's fascinating, because often the ones you mentioned first, the capital T ones, are the ones that society would look at and go, that was a bad event that happened to that person. But the second case, they would be probably a little bit harder to work through, because on
Correct.
the surface, you go, that wasn't a big deal.
Yeah, that's right. It wasn't a big deal
to the person.
Yeah, that's right. Because if you think about as children, we're really small and vulnerable. And we, in order to have our self-esteem intact when we grow up, we need to feel safe and secure. So sometimes we don't always feel safe and secure if there's not enough money at the end of the week to buy groceries or for power. We need to feel like we're enough. We don't have to do anything to win anyone's like love or attention. We're just enough for just being ourselves and lovable. And sometimes that can be a bit distorted. And another common one that I see all the time, Kate, is around one of the questions that I ask is when we go back, is like, with your siblings and the dynamics, like, did you feel like you were favorited more? Did you get more at Christmas time or birthdays? And sometimes, like, children with a really immature, undeveloped brain can kind of say, well, my brother got 7 presents and I only got 1. But you and I, as rational human beings, know that, well, that 1 present was probably worth the same price as those 7 gifts. But an 8-year-old doesn't know that.
No, that's really interesting. And if we have worked out, maybe we're a little bit avoidant when it comes to our money, or we're not that confident to take the first step, or we feel guilty when we spend money, and then we've had a look at our money story, we've pulled out some of those memories and thought about how that's impacting us today. How can we start to sort of move forwards and think about all those positive strengths and character skills that we do have, and how we can harness those to make better financial decisions in the future.
Well, I think, Kate, it's about realizing that some of those beliefs that we have about money just aren't true. It's just kind of like when we grew up, we all believed in the tooth fairy. It's like, yeah, we lose our tooth and we get a couple of bucks from the tooth fairy. And then we get to a certain age where it's like, yeah, she's not really true. She's not real.
Very strange when you think about that.
I know.
We all had this collective belief and all the adults went along with it.
I know. It's like getting money from a fairy. But yeah, we get to a certain age when we go, well, actually, that's not true. That was just a made-up story. Unfortunately, when it comes to our money beliefs, we don't have someone tell us, well, that money belief isn't true. You just made that up when you were really young. So that first step, Kate, is about deciding that actually, you know what, that money belief isn't serving me and I need to create a new one, a more positive one. Now, the challenge with that, while it's an easy process, it takes a lot of discipline because you might have that money belief that, and it could be something to do with wealth, around seeing wealthy people as being like greedy or not very nice, or they're unhappy. And those beliefs that we have around wealth can really block us. So it's about deciding that no, wealth is a positive thing. But the challenge is that you might have had 20 or 30 years of that belief going around in your head all the time that wealthy people are bad or wealthy people are unhappy. So those neural pathways that have been developed and we have that autopilot to, they're deeply ingrained. So now what we need to do is we need to create a new neural pathway, and it's about deciding that, okay, wealth is a positive thing. And so we need to retrain our brain and unlearn what we learned growing up. And that takes a lot of practice and repetition, but it can be done. So it's about just reminding ourselves every day that wealth is good, wealth is positive, and just saying that over and over again until our brain starts to create a new neural pathway. And if you kind of think about like playing a musical instrument, like people that have never played the piano before, they're not going to go there and start playing the piano. But if they practice and do their scales every day and practice every day for hours and hours, then within a year's time, they can just sit at that piano and just start to play. It's the same with our money beliefs.
Yeah, especially with the wealth picture, it's often you can get a bit more comfortable with the idea of building wealth if you think about what you can actually use that money to do. And you can use it to support your friends and family. You can use it to give you choices. You can use it to help more people in the community around you. And sometimes thinking about what you can do with it helps you become more comfortable with the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to see it to believe it. And so if our only experience that we've had with wealth is it's to do more harm than good, then that's what we're going to believe. So it's about, we need to be really conscious about, okay, well, I'm going to go and seek out, what are people that have got money, what are they doing with it? How are they showing up in the world in a really positive way? And then you start to model those behaviors rather than the opposite.
Now, I know you have this quiz on your website so people can work out what kind of money personality they have and how they can harness it. Are you able to share some of the 8 money types with us today?
Yeah, sure. So that's right. So on my website, there is a money type quiz that you can do, and it's created by a woman in America called Deborah Price, and she founded the Money Coaching Institute, which is where a lot of this work comes from. And she's created 8 money types, and they're based on 20 years of research, and they're also based on Carl Jung archetypes. So just like there's the Myers-Briggs and we've got those personality traits, we also have them for money. So there's 8 different money types. So one of my favorite money types in there is the innocent. And the innocent is, if you think of like a child, that's kind of like, well, I don't know what to do. And I see that all the time. It's like people aren't taking action because like, well, I was never taught about money. My parents weren't good with it. I didn't learn about it at school, so I just don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And so it's that very childlike nature. And sometimes it can create a lot of anxiety and fear. And it's like this whole thing about money, this whole concept is quite scary. I don't know what to do. So I either do nothing and just avoid and put my head in the sand and just not deal with it, or I'll give that responsibility to someone else. It's like, I just want someone else to manage it for me or take care of it, whether it's my parents or whether it's my partner. Mm-hmm. So they're very innocent when it comes to money. And the beauty of these money types, Kate, is that they're not who you are. They're just where you are in your financial journey. So you can evolve from that. And so one of the other money types there is the warrior. And the warrior is who we all want to aspire to be. So the warrior is tasked with the external world of earning money, setting goals, managing it, learning about investing and taking action with their money. So they're very financially successful, but they're balanced in regards to that as well. So they're just very goals orientated. They're very collaborative. They're really loyal when it comes to money. So that's that warrior money type. Another one is a fool. So a fool is very kind of happy-go-lucky when it comes to money. They're kind of like, lives for today, money's for fun and adventure. They tend to be high risk takers. They kind of see money as a bit of a game, kind of a bit of a gamble. So they're quite often very competent when it comes to earning money, but quite often it doesn't stick around for very long. They don't like details. So they're kind of like, oh, let's have a look at this. Looks like a really exciting investment opportunity. And rather than actually looking at the details and the costs and benefits, like, yeah, I'm in, I'm going to do it. Or they're at the shops and they're kind of like, oh, yeah, that looks really great. I'm just going to buy it. Like my whole strategy is see it, love it, buy it, rather than kind of looking at how am I going to pay for this? How's that impacting me long term? They're very short term focused. So that's the fool, likes to have a lot of fun with money. And we would have a little bit of fool, but not too much because it can really kind of disrail our financial outcomes.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different ones there. Highly encourage people to go on and take the money type quiz and kind of just find out. They're basically just a collection of all different patterns and characteristics when it comes to money. And when you know what yours are, they become your teacher and ally, because what these money types do is it shines a light on your own financial strengths and weaknesses. So what are the areas that I need to grow in, and what are the areas that I actually am really good at that I should really acknowledge and celebrate for myself? Quite often clients will come to me and they'll be like, oh, I really need to get on the right track and do the right things with money, and I just don't feel like I'm doing the right things. And when we actually kind of unpack some of the strategies and things that they're doing, it's like, you are actually doing all the right things, but they just don't have this that self-belief about themselves.
Have you seen clients that have taken the money personality quiz actually be able to use that strengths and weaknesses information to make better decisions in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Because what these money types doing and identifying which ones you are, it's kind of like, well, now I can actually see, oh, yeah, I do have a fair bit of that money type. And these are the challenges that money type has. So when I was saying about the fool, they don't look at the details. They don't look at long-term consequences. And you and I know with money, we need to take that long-term approach and view when it comes to our money rather than just thinking of it for today. So knowing those money types, it kind of shines a light on what are those challenges that we need to overcome and learn from and create new strategies to overcome that, so we can be more like the warrior money type.
No, that's so interesting. And I think I definitely want to go and do that quiz after we finish recording today. So I'll have it in the show notes if any listeners want to give it a go. But pulling everything we've talked about today, why do you think it's so important that we do the work to get a better handle of our money story and how we think about money today if we want to change our financial behavior and habits going forward? And do you think just learning is enough? Like learning all of the facts and figures about investing is enough to make a change?
Yeah, so I always believed many years ago as a financial advisor that the problem people had was financial literacy. They didn't know what they needed to do. But I now see that as very different. It's not about that financial literacy because I'm pretty sure, Kate, you've never met anyone that said to you, oh, I didn't know the key to wealth was spending less than I earn and saving and investing that money. We all know what we need to do. We all know that we need to eat well and exercise in order to be healthy. So it's not always a knowledge thing. It comes down to that confidence and those behaviours and those strategies and patterns that we developed at a very young age that are holding us back. So I believe that personal finance is 20% knowledge, 80% behaviour. So as investors, we get really focused on the share market going up and down. And you and I know that over long periods of time, like if you're investing in risky assets, there's a 1 in 5 chance, 1 in 5 years that your money will go down. And if we're prepared for that and override that, that's fine. The biggest detriment to your financial position isn't those share markets ups and downs. It is those little things you do every day with your money. That $40 for lunch or going to Target. It's like people say to me, oh yeah, I don't shop at Louis Vuitton or Gucci or even David Jones. I just shop at Kmart. It's like, that's fine. But if you're shopping at Kmart every week and spending between $40 and $100, it's those little things that add up over time that make much more of a significant impact on our money.
Yeah. And sometimes we don't think about all of those little decisions and little purchases because they seem so small at the time, but it's the showing up, it's the saving this week, it's the going for the run when you don't feel like it. It's all those small choices you make that have a huge impact on where you're going to be in 10, 20, and 30 years' time. And hopefully for the better. I hope that everyone listening is going to be in a much better financial position in 30 years' time than they are right now. And part of that is doing this work.
I believe so, because in order to make changes, we need to have an awareness. So we need to name it to tame it. And so by actually going and having a look at your story, having a look at what money types you are, you're actually recognizing, well, this is the origin of where this was formed. This is why I do what I do. And now you get to decide as an adult, do I want to continue down that path, or do I want to make some small but significant changes so I can get on a different track when it comes to managing my money and the financial consequences as a result?
Wonderful. Well, we're going to be diving into mindset a bit more in part 2, which is in the coming weeks, which we're going to be talking more about money and couples and relationships and how to manage all of that complicated stuff. But Karen, before we wrap up, what is the number one thing you want listeners to take away and do from this episode?
So the number one thing is writing out your money story, really doing that self-reflection and understanding those origins of why you do what you do with money. And it's also about having compassion. I think one of the biggest things when we talk about those emotions of shame, guilt, and fear. Fear, that's it. Thank you. Fear. So if we've had those for a long time, when we're wanting to make changes and do better with money, sometimes we need to do some forgiveness and forgive ourselves for, yes, I got myself into debt, or yes, I didn't make the most of those financial opportunities, but I was doing the best that I could with the resources that I had at the time. So it's about forgiving yourself. It may be about forgiving your parents. Like, why do my parents teach me, this cycle of a debt cycle, or maybe it was about overspending. Sometimes we need to forgive the people that we role modeled as well. I think just doing that and releasing that so then we can move forward is a really healthy thing to do.
I love that idea of forgiving your past self, because a lot of us regret that we didn't start investing earlier. We didn't start sorting out our finances earlier, because we could be in XYZ better position now, but you didn't have all of that information back then. You didn't have the career you have now. You didn't have the knowledge, the resources, the mindset to do what you're doing now. So forgiving yourself for the decisions and choices you made then is really important, that you can to make that next step and move forwards.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I think everyone will get something out of today's conversation, and you'll be back very soon talking about money and relationships. So everyone keep an eye out for that. But if people wanted to try out your money quiz, connect with you, send you any questions following today's episode, where should they head to?
So I have the website, womentalkingfinance.com.au, and there's a quiz page there, so you can go on and take the quiz. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I do a newsletter there and have lots of content and exercises and things people can do there. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, Women Talking Finance.
Wonderful. Well, we'll include links to all of that in the show notes. But Karen, thank you so much for joining me today.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks, Kate.